The people of the land of Second Life have a great many stories, which they tell to each other, all about the place and the people. Some of the stories are common knowledge, but there is one story that is not, for the people have kept it among themselves. It has been handed on from one person to another for a number of years. The first to tell this story lived by a meadow on the land of Second Life. This meadow used to be under the sea at one time, but the ground had risen, and the meadow of yellow and gold flowers stretched far as the eye can see. Near the meadow sat a castle called Avalon, with its stone walls, its towers, and its many rooms. In the castle of Avalon lived the king with his wife, the queen, and their daughter. The heavy, damp days of autumn, which destroyed the leaves of the wood, had already fallen upon the forest. The icy winter had come, and the woods were silent. Yet a faint sound of a distant bell could be heard in the distance. The king's daughter, who had been walking in the forest, heard it, but thought it might be the sound of the wind through the trees. Time passed, and then one evening at sunset, when glimpses of golden clouds could be seen among the chimney pots, a curious sound could be heard, first by one person, then by another. The sound was like a church bell, but it only lasted a moment. "There is the evening bell," people would say. "The day is over, and the sun is setting." But as the sun began to go down, and the clouds were fiery red, a great stillness would come over the land. Those who went outside the town, where the houses were more scattered, heard the tones of the bell much better and longer. It seemed as if the sound came from somewhere deep in the woods, and the people looked in that direction. Time passed, and the musical sound of the bell continued to be heard. But there came a time when the people of the village began to question each other to where the sound came from. Some began to think that it might lead to a place of riches and wonderment. Others said to one another, "That bell has such a wonderfully sweet sound. Shall we go and take a look at it closer?" A great many people went into the forest to seek the bell and to find the answer to the sound. One woman wrote a poem about it and said that it sounded like a mother's voice to a beloved child. No melody could be sweeter than the chimes of this bell. Now people went out into the land of Second Life in search of the bell. They traveled far and wide to places of wonder. They climbed mountains. Some sailed over the seas to land yet explored. Yet none were able to find the bell. The sound of the bell continued to be heard from a distant, far away, until finally it was heard no more. Years passed, and many had begun to forget that the sound of the bell had even existed. Then one day, once again could be heard the sound of the unknown bell, more than unusually loud, coming from the woods. On hearing it, many people felt anxious to go and find it. When the people arrived at the edge of the forest, they said, "Now then, here we are. The bell doesn't exist. It is only something people have imagined." Just then, the sound of the bell was heard so beautifully and solemnly from the woods that many made up their minds to go still further on. The wood was deeply grown. They passed a waterfall where the birds were singing and the sunbeams played. They soon came to a church with roses climbing up its sides. Streams of crystal blue water flowed from mountain tops into deep pools. And there, on top of the church, hung a golden bell. Was this the one they had heard? All agreed that it must be so, except one who said that the tones which moved all hearts were quite different from these. She who spoke was the king's daughter, and so the others said, "That kind of person must always be wiser than anyone else." Therefore they let her go alone, and as she walked on she heard the sound of the bell when the wind blew in that direction. The deep toned sounds of the bell began to sound much stronger, and it seemed as if there was an organ playing with it, and the sounds came from the left, where the heart is placed. "If I have to go to the end of the world," she said, "I will and must find the bell." The next day she ventured out again to seek the sound of the bell. She went further and further into the woods, where the most extraordinary flowers grew. There were ones with tall green stems that blew gently in the wind, pale pink flowers which seemed to glisten in the sun, blue flowers, red flowers with centers, and hummingbirds flittering from blossom to blossom, apple trees that rained petals all around. Yet further and further she went. She came upon meadows with flowing fields of swaying flowers, glades with deep blue lakes. Then the sun began to go down, and the clouds became a fiery red. A great stillness came over the woods. The king's daughter looked out over the water and said, "Never shall I find what I seek. Now the sun is going down, the night is coming on, the dark night. Perhaps I can catch one more glimpse of the sun before it sinks beneath the earth. I will climb up, high as the trees." She climbed up above the town, high above where land and sky met, and the king's daughter reached the top before the sun disappeared. From this height, oh, what splendor lay before her! The ocean, the wide, beautiful ocean. The sun stood like a great shining altar out where the sea and sky met. Everything melted away into glowing colors. The woods sang, the ocean sang, and her heart sang with them. All nature was like a vast holy temple, where trees and floating clouds were as pillars, flowers and grass the woven tapestry, and the heaven itself a great dome. The red colors vanished as the sun went down, but millions of stars peeked out. They were like countless diamond lamps, and the king's daughter spread out her arms toward heaven, sea, and forest. At that moment, as she looked out toward the world, in that great temple of nature and poetry, all around her could be heard the sound of the invisible bell.